Okay, hey church girl, we're trying something new for the first time. We've got podcast style mics today.
So cool.
It's so cool. Hey Jasmine.
Hey PK, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks.
You look gorgeous, by the way.
You look gorgeous. We are excited about this conversation, and we just wanted to try something new, do something fun.
Super
kind of my
fun.
first time using one of these, which is
I like
cool.
the mics.
Yeah,
I feel like super official right now.
Yeah, it feels real. But Jasmine, she's here with us today, and we've got a fun conversation, really a story, a testimony. One of my favorite things about being a part of community is hearing the testimonies of the goodness and faithfulness of God.
Yeah, he's so good.
Jasmine, she's just incredible. She's going to tell you all about herself, but just a couple weeks ago, we were sitting down for coffee.
Yeah.
And at one of our favorite spots, B Cup. I don't know if we've had coffee anywhere else.
We love B Cup.
We love
It's in East Village, if you don't know.
Yeah, it's right next to Trinity East Village. Yeah. And she was just telling me more of her story, more than I'd heard before. And I just remember leaving feeling so just amazed by her, who she is, the endurance, the strength, but also by the goodness of God.
Yeah, come on.
And that God really does redeem all things. And Jasmine, I think your story is such a testimony to that. So I just want to say thank you. I believe in you. I'm grateful for you. I think you're incredible. And we want you to share a little bit about your story today.
So cool. Well, first I have to start off by saying, PK, look where we are right now.
I know.
God is so
Beautiful.
amazing. Just how far we've come. I mean, I've only been and had the opportunity to be at Trinity for about 2 years almost now.
Wow.
And just growing and knowing and watching how Church Girl has blossomed and just everything and just getting to be a part of it is an honor. So I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you
grateful.
so much.
Well, I love what you talked about earlier. We were talking about chapters. Different chapters in your life. Tell us that story. That's just a powerful story when God spoke that to you.
Yeah, so that's really good. So for those that are probably new to my story, I come from an incredible, dynamic family, I like to say. So I am Black American. I'm originally born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. And my family, though, we always laugh because most of them are from Washington, D.C. And if you know about the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area, Washington, D.C. and Maryland, they're always like, you're the stepsister type of vibes. And so anyway, I was born in Baltimore, and I'm actually the baby of 7 children.
It's amazing.
7 kids, right? So I am the baby of 7 children.
Do you feel like the baby?
Oh, I own that title. I am the baby of those 7 kids. And I literally, when I kind of talk about my story a bit, I like to frame it around the messaging that God's hands literally been in it the moment that I was formed in my mother's womb. Good. Because of every step and every part of my story and my journey that just has been turning, shifting, shaping, whether it was by my choice or by circumstances. And so I actually lost both my parents before I was 12 years old. I lost my dad first. I was 7 years old, going on 8. And my mom passed shortly after that, about 3 years later. She passed in 2006, and I was 11 going on 12. And when this all happened, I mean, that first 10 years of my life, I was living the dream of the baby girl, right? Like, I like to say that my dad was my best friend. This man is like the funniest guy you probably would have ever met. And I know that each and every one of my siblings, we all have a different perspective because we all grew in a different way with our parents. And my dad and I, though, we were like best friends. So I like to tell everybody when I talk about this story that literally my dad, if he carried a suitcase, I was the suitcase, okay?
I love it.
Because wherever he went, I was going. I would cry if I couldn't go.
What a special bond.
It was like, it just felt so long lasting. And I know that God gave me that special moment with my dad so that as I carried out and to live out the legacy that he's left me, I get to have that joy because I watched my dad go on the streets of Baltimore and be in the newspaper, building community, wearing these shirts that were like purple that said God is here for you. And we would hand out sandwich bags to the homeless. And I got to see that at 5 to 6 years old. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I did get some beatings because I was hard-headed. Yeah. But it was like his love was always surrounding me. And then we had my mom. All my family would say to this day that I am the living, breathing replication of my mother. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but my mother was one of the first Black women to model for a company called Hex. Wow. Back in the day. And this was a big department store that was really bought out by Macy's. Yeah. And so I'm in the model industry now. God has just been doing some incredible things with that. But basically, as that happened in my life, I mean, I got the opportunity to not necessarily be placed in the foster care system, to be moved from home to home of strangers. Mm-hmm. However, in my perspective, moving home from family member to family member by the age of 18 still makes that a big impact in your journey.
Absolutely.
And so
and one of the things about Jasmine, and she kind of cracks me up with this, is like she's so full of joy that even now, like you're watching this and you're like, how is she smiling through the details of really a lot of grief, And of course, that's what Jesus does. Yes. That's what Jesus does to our story.
So good.
But at the same time, there was a lot of pain there too, like you said, like your siblings, they had different experiences.
Yeah, for sure.
And so your parents, they really went through a lot.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And talk a little bit just about the realness of that for a second, like your mom and your dad and kind of the relationship there.
Yeah, that's great. So I would say that one thing for certain, especially in this, I don't know who's watching this episode, but I really encourage you that as you're leaning and as you're listening, I mean, I pray that God speaks to you through me. Yeah. But what I want to share, though, is that I would say the parents that my siblings knew, I didn't know as much. However, when my parents were really coming together, they both had difficult lives. I mean, my mother was adopted. How crazy is that? I wound up being adopted as well. My dad also, he was in the Army and he battled an addiction to drugs. And my mother as well, before I was even born. And they went through a lot of different things that, the results of drug abuse leads to broken families. Yeah. It leads to people being abused emotionally, physically, and it doesn't necessarily... it doesn't hit the same when you watch it as a baby of 7 because they were redeeming their lives at that time. I remember hearing stories from my siblings and hearing stories from my family members about my dad literally going to rehab. Wow. I wasn't even a speck in the eye when that was brought about, but my dad went to rehab, and when he did go to rehab, he redeemed his life and became a pastor.
So cool.
And I was a pastor's kid.
So cool.
And I watched my dad live the redeeming life, but I also saw the areas that affected our family, throughout the relationships that they had. And I also witnessed how my mom's choice of abusing drugs at a younger age and my parents splitting up. Like, I remember when I was around the age of 7, when both my parents were living, I was at my mom's house on the weekends because my dad had access to better schooling. So I would spend time at a private school where I was the only Black girl in my class because we were in an area that was more privileged. And I would watch going to school and then going to my mom's, and I would cry with my mom, like, I want to go back to Dad's house. I don't like it here, and all the things. And my mom and my dad literally had a separation in their marriage. I didn't realize what that separation was going to have an impact on me as I got older when I lost them. And so here I am, understanding, trying to figure out what it means to lose your parents so early, and I just didn't have a way to put my finger on it.
Yeah, and you were really in a place too. One of the things that you explained to me is that your siblings at the time, you were the baby of 7, but unfortunately, all of your siblings were not in a place to be able
to take me in,
to take you in, and I think that's just a wild part of the story that they were all on their own journey as well. Yeah. And what explain that. What was that like?
Yeah, I think that there is a piece of that story, especially with my siblings. Love them all so much. But I think that even like my closest sister, who literally has inspired me to be in fashion. I mean, she
Yeah.
graduated from FIT, she's been living in the New York space for years. But at the time of us losing our parents, she was fresh in college.
Wow.
So there was no way a sister that I lived with and grew up with could take my life on as a
Right.
12-year-old, just trying to figure life out. And she's trying to figure life out. I'm trying to figure life out. And essentially, we both lived very similar stories of figuring out what to do next, right? And so
Yeah.
I had that sister that I was probably the closest with at the time. And then I had my other sister who was just 4 years older than me that was living with her mom. And then I had my other siblings. They were married, they moved, they graduated college. And then I had my brothers who also were facing incarceration. And it just wasn't a good fit at the time for them to take on the responsibility of a 12-year-old. And I
Yeah.
completely understand
And
that.
and is it that your mom and dad, are you their only child together?
No,
Or
actually,
how
my
many
sister.
siblings?
So we actually were raised in a space where we didn't do the half sibling thing.
Yeah.
But as I got older, you find out things that you just know as you grow.
Yeah.
But for us, my sister and I, we the one that's 8 years older than me, we both
Yeah.
have the same parents, and we both have like grown up literally from kids. I mean, she talks about how she changed my diapers,
Yeah.
and my other siblings changed my diapers too, but my sister and I, we were the only ones that had the same parents. And all of us kind of went into a space where we were individualized. But the biggest thing for me, just to kind of circle back a little bit,
Yeah.
is when I remember this day honestly like it was yesterday because it's a moment you can never forget. But I remember waking up, and at the time of my mom kind of changing out of the drug abuse and moving over to cigarettes, right? And so she developed this habit of smoking cigarettes for a long time, which later developed what they call COPD.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's her living off of one lung. And I remember that they would tell her, like, hey, you know, Miss Green, you got to stop smoking these cigarettes. And she just wouldn't. I mean, she was, doing her own thing. And I look back on that moment, and I remember my sister and I, when we were in the house, we would take her cigarettes and like hide them in the trash, like wet them and like run and drop them in the trash. And she would be yelling at us like, where's my stuff? But over and over again, I remember the constant traveling to the hospital. So I'm in 6th grade, and around about 2 a.m. to 3 a.m., I'm constantly waking up, missing school sometimes in the morning. My family is checking in on my mom. They're coming to see if she's doing okay. But we were struggling. We weren't doing well. I mean, my mom picked up our life from Baltimore and moved us to Prince George's County in Maryland. And I was paying some of the bills for my mom's behalf. I was using our food stamps card to just go get groceries. My mom would be like, call the cab. I was calling the ambulance, at less than 12 years old. And I mean, it taught me how to grow up really fast, but it also was a huge hindrance to my development as an adolescent, because when my mom passed, I had to move in with my aunt who established her own life. She had raised her kids. She didn't know what to do with no 12-year-old, besides what she understood.
Yeah.
But a lot of times what I've realized throughout that entire journey is all of my family members, they did the best that they could with what they had.
Yeah.
However, a lot of the things that I needed was attention to the brokenness that I was experiencing.
Yeah.
And God's glory, as I look back now, of course, during the season, I couldn't imagine. I don't even think I thought about God at that time. I'm like, actually, I remember moving into my first home that I moved in with one of my aunts, and I lived there for about 3 years. I remember moving in so angry. I'm like, who is this woman? I barely knew her. I mean, I knew her because she's my aunt, right? And she was there for my mom, but I personally didn't know her as a relationship, as a mother figure.
Yeah.
And so I'm living in this brokenness, and I'm doing my own thing. I'm lying. I don't want to talk to nobody. They had me in therapy. I would go, just ignore everybody because I was angry. And I remember praying to God, and I'm like, if you were real, you wouldn't have taken my parents. And so I lived my adolescence really trying to stay away from religion and Christianity in general. And I'm like, there's no way that there's a God like this that would do something like this to me. And so I witnessed over those course of those, I want to say about 12 years of my life, me living out in promiscuity, me living out the search of God's love in that.
Yeah.
Me living it out and stealing and lying and getting in the wrong crowds and
Yeah.
sneaking out, running away from home.
And this is all before you're 18 years
all
old.
before I'm 18.
Yeah.
And I watched just doing a reflection back to it, and I still ultimately thank God for therapy that I'm in and I've been in for the last 5 years. But I realized how much of my life spoke to a lot of the trauma of being abandoned, rejected. Because a lot of the times when I was moving, what was happening is it wasn't that no one loved me, right? It wasn't the lack of love. What it was the enemy using the happenstance and the circumstance of my life to dictate my decisions.
Wow.
And so I would move from home to home because at some point, people got tired. She's lying, she's stealing. I was never stealing from my family, but I would steal because it was attention grabbing. It was like I could get something, but I knew that at the time, and I look back on the reflection of it, that I experienced a lot of brokenness because of something that felt like a missing piece of abandonment. So when people would say, hey, you know what, I can't handle Jasmine anymore, I thought that was about me, but it wasn't about me. It was actually about the spirits that I was facing as a child who had a hole in her heart. So by the time I was 16, I was facing a felony charge. I was arrested, and I was going to go to jail. Praise God for my family.
Yeah.
I'm laughing about it. It's not a funny moment, but I look back at that moment because if it wasn't for God talking to me in the room where they lock you up, you know, and he's sitting there and I hear him speaking to me and I'm writing out why I took the item that I did. And he says, tell the truth. And I said, God, what you talking about? So would you let's walk back. Let's rewind. I did tell them that So I remember, right? I'm sitting there, I'm writing my testimony. He said, tell the truth. And the item that I stole was because I wanted to buy myself good clothes.
Yeah.
Because at that point, I was traveling from home to home and I was wearing clothes of my older cousins. So I felt like I wasn't pretty, which led to the fact that I started to fight in school. And so instead of me wanting to get bullied, I said, let me get my own money in my own way.
Yeah.
And I realized that me writing that down and sharing my testimony through what God was speaking to me, even though I didn't know it was God at the time, what he was speaking to me allowed freedom to happen in my life. And at that point, I never stole again.
Wow.
I
so
never
good.
went through a moment of thinking that he would not supply for me. And in addition to that, I mean, my aunt had to pay a fine, you know, all the things, like, which was really rough at the time because she's trying to do her best with what she has, right?
Yeah.
And here I am trying to figure out why am I experiencing all this turmoil?
Yeah.
And so anyway, fast forward, I go and I'm still trying to literally fight what the enemy is telling me is my truth, that I'm broken, I'm not loved, I'm not enough. People will continue to reject me. You know, you are a thief, even though I had stopped stealing. So people would accuse me around my family, my friends, and things like that. And I would have to fight mentally to literally prove that what God said about me was true. And I remember one of my aunts, she spoke something to me. And all of my family, they're all reverends. So I grew up in a Christian family. I was raised in a household with women and very powerful women in the ministry. And, you know, I would see part of the blessings of how God would use them for me. And I would see part of the downfalls of them in their human experience, right? And so sometimes they couldn't meet some of the standards of Jesus, and that's okay. But other times they would speak life into me. And I remember one of my aunts telling me is, Jasmine, you're not what people say about you. And she said,
So good.
I can't take you in, but I do love you. And this was one of my aunts that I stayed with temporarily for a week or so. And I would go from home to home. And by the age of 17, I actually lived between siblings and aunts and family members at least 8 times. And so by the age of 17, I was on the verge of facing homelessness.
And what did that do for you when she said that to you?
Yeah.
What did that do in your heart?
Yeah, honestly, it felt like a little window. I wouldn't say that it opened up completely,
Yeah.
but it felt like a window, like there was an escape somewhere that I didn't have to be what people said I was or what I was experiencing.
Beautiful.
And I would say that there is another one of my aunts, and she's actually not my blood aunt. She is a relative to friends and family, so she's a family friend. And I remember she took me on this duck trip in DC. I don't know if anybody knows about those boat rides that you get to go on in the city, but this in the DC area was called the duck boat, right?
Okay.
And so it's the shape of a duck in the front, and it turns into a tour, and then it goes into the water and it takes you on the water in Washington, DC, right? So she takes me on this, and this was my first time hanging out with her by myself. And I remember we're on the boat and they're asking some very random questions. And my aunt whispers, I call her my aunt, but she whispers the answer. And she said, I shot up and I was only 13. She said, I shot up and I was like shouting out the answer. And she was like, sit down, like, try to calm me down. And I was like, what? That's the right answer, right? And she was like, she tells me to this day, at that moment, I knew you were gonna be somebody because you were so bold. You didn't care what was happening around you. You were gonna be bright. You were gonna do all of these things. And it wasn't until she took me in after my age of 18 years old and I moved in with her that I realized that she was an angel. Like, I think that God literally handpicked her and was like, yup, I'm going to use your story, your life, and you're going to inspire this young lady that you had no idea existed. And the craziest thing, if you guys really want to be wild, is how God orchestrates things in your testimony, is that when I was at my mother's funeral, she was there. I didn't know her, never seen her before, never thought about her. And if she was here, she would tell you, she saw me and was like, man, one day if I got to take in that young girl, I will.
Wow. God was already putting that
He
in her
was
heart.
already putting it in her heart. And she would literally bawl cry right now. I mean, I love her if she's watching this. And she didn't know. I mean, she never wanted kids. She never wanted kids. She's, an entrepreneur. She never worked for anyone, had her own business at 18 years old and just lived her life. And she's my aunt. She's probably about, I want to say, she's going to be embarrassed, but like 59 here around this age. And I remember her telling me that story. I couldn't believe it. I was like, there's no way. There's no way that God is that much of a designer. And she would just prove to me over and over again, organically, how good God's love was for me.
Yeah.
Over and over again.
And then that started a new chapter in your life,
That's
right?
chapter 2.
Chapter 2. So then you're past 18.
Yeah.
And
getting ready to go to college.
Yeah, which is already just a miracle too, right?
That was a miracle. I mean, honestly, I was a very studious student. So because at the time of my life, I mean, I was facing a lot of turmoil mentally, emotionally, and physically that I didn't think I was going to college. I'm like, there's no way. I literally thought I was going to work at McDonald's as a manager. Like, that was like my highest goal. And it wasn't until people started speaking life into me in high school, the counselor, like my counselor and my principal, guys, listen to this. They drove me to Towson University on the campus just so I could see it and believe in me that I was going to go to school. I mean, I was a 3.6 average GPA student. I knew that school at some point would get me out of my circumstances. I didn't really understand where I was going to go. I was studying biotech in high school. I was double.
But just think of those people, like having educators like that who believe in you.
No, I literally to this day, I wouldn't be able. I don't think I would believe in college the way I would have if it wasn't for them. And just the fact that my teachers were so invested in me because they saw I was always fighting. They're like, how are you fighting? And you make a 3.6, there's something missing here, And they poured into me and they believed in me. And I wind up applying to 13 schools and I got into all of them.
Come on.
But financially, I didn't know how I was going to go to school. I didn't have a parent kind of backing me on that space. I mean, I had scholarships and I got my first scholarship because y'all want to laugh really quickly. I wanted to go to school for the FBI.
I love that. I think that's cool.
I wanted to work for the FBI. I was so passionate about science. And I actually got 2 scholarships from my county to cover the first 2 years of my schooling so that I can study to be a forensic pathologist.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Hey, God will use anything to get you in.
And he will orchestrate your story the way that he really wants it. So incredible.
So you're in college
Yeah.
and God starts to speak to you about your purpose even more.
Yeah.
Modeling and
Yeah.
different things like that. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I'm in school, and I mean, I actually was signed to an agency at the age of 16. One of my aunts saw my gifts and like how animated I was and my posing, and she's like, "Girl, we need to put you in something incredible." It was my first aunt that I was living in. If it wasn't for her making that decision, I don't know if I would have even pursued it. But she put me in this modeling agency, and I actually booked my first commercial at like 16, 15, I want to say like 14, 15 in JCPenney. It was like half my face. I got paid. It was great. I loved it. And so that was my first introduction to the modeling world.
Yeah.
And I would go to the castings and things like that, but I just wasn't getting picked up. And I look back now and I reflect on that, and I kind of say like, well, why was this the case? And, you know, developing over the time of this industry, I have learned that at the time of my pursuit around 2006 or 7, there wasn't diversity and inclusion in Black and brown women in advertisements. Like that just wasn't like a thing. I mean, there was some in commercial, but they were typically more fair skinned. So I look back on that moment and I'm like, you know, I wasn't just tapped in just yet. And you know what? That's okay, because what happened is that created a shift for me to leave that agency and start freelancing for the next 10 years. And so over that course of the time, modeling became like my outlet.
Yeah.
It became a space where I would go out and I would just start working and just doing things. This was before I even knew what a casting director was. I didn't know what model management was. I didn't know any of that. And I would go out and essentially I'd just be a connector. So I would say, hey, you look gorgeous. You know, I know a photographer. I should connect you with them. And over time, I started building up this rapport in my city in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And I met this one photographer. And unfortunately, at the start of that career, I was sexually harassed by him. And so it taught me that the agency was protection and I needed to be a little bit more careful as I'm out here pursuing that.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, I decided to take a step in front of the camera, and I started working behind the scenes. So I started doing production things. I started trying to get in and fit in wherever I could, every fashion show in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, every person that would travel to New York, I would go up and I would try to help. I would just want to be in the scene, and I learned so much. And so I started producing my own shows in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And those shows would reach up to capacity of 600 people sometimes. And then some of the proceeds we would give back to our school. We made
So cool.
Towson University probably about $60,000 a year from the shows that we would produce, and hiring fashion designers from LA to DC to Maryland. Wow. And so I started leaning into that. And then as I'm going throughout the college experience, I got my first opportunity to work in New York Fashion Week with a designer, and she was understudying for Vera Wang. And I didn't really understand how beautiful Vera Wang was until I saw her. But I like to say she's like a fashion auntie. But I met her and I was like, wow, women actually do this. Like, I want to go forth and I want to be serious about this career. And the designer that gave me the opportunity to come out with her, she literally changed my life. You know, and in my perspective of the pursuit. Yeah. And so I met a bunch of models that were from Europe, Sudan, Ethiopia, all types of things. And they told me their stories. Yeah. They were like, hey, I actually battle with mental health. Hey, I actually have also been sexually assaulted before. And they're being so vulnerable with me. They're being so open with me. Yeah. And in that moment, I said, I got to do something about this. And I don't know what it is, God, but I got to do something. And so I'm graduating college, and I graduated with 2 degrees, one in mass comm with a focus in PR and journalism. And then I also graduated with a psych degree. Changed my major. That's a whole nother story for another podcast. Yeah. But when I did change my major and everything, it was like God was like, I gave you gifts and I want you to use them. Your story is something that you're going to apply in your business. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about here. God, I don't know what you're saying, but let me see how this is going to work. And so my aunt that I moved in with at the time, she told me, she said, I'm 18, I'm in college. Well, at this point, I'm 21. She said, you should launch a business. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do. And she said, dig deep inside of you and remember what you know. And so I was like, at this point, I know modeling and production. That's all I know. And I decided to launch Mars Management, which is about 9 years old this year.
Come on.
And I launched it the day after I graduated college. Literally, I graduated on the 18th. I launched it on May 19th. And when I launched it, I did not expect it to take off the way that God has been blessing me at all. I came into it with, hey, I just want to help Black and brown women who deal with mental health issues, who want to be seen in print and commercial and runway. 3 years in, I failed tremendously. Didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't until I got a business coach and started getting mentorship that the business started to take off. And we had the pleasure of working with brands like Sephora, putting on fashion shows at the Nordstrom in Tyson's Corner in DMV, working with Gap to put their fashion show on that was local as well. And then it just started going up. I went from having 4 models to currently we have 11. I have 12 contractors, a full-time executive assistant, and our recent advertisements and things that we've been working with is Keurig, Walmart, and of course, I mean, God has shown me throughout that whole process, he had this thing figured out.
Yeah.
He was working in every little detail from the moment that I moved into that first aunt's house to put me in the agency to the moment that he had to redeem me when the felony was coming so that I can learn how to give instead of taking, to the moment I graduated college for him to know that faith and dreams are possible, to the moment of wrapping myself around redemption and love for myself internally so that I can give it to other people.
Yeah.
Is really how he's blessed me. And I mean, he blew my mind last year. Last year, I was actually nominated for Forbes 30 Under 30.
Let's go.
And I was incredibly shocked. The woman reached out to me on LinkedIn and sent me an email. And I had no idea that this was a part of what God's blessing was leaning me towards.
So cool, Jasmine. I love it. What I love about your story as we get ready to wrap up here in just a couple moments is there was always a person in your life who was helping to redeem your story.
Yes.
And sometimes I think God, he moves in our life and he often does it through other people.
Yeah, that's
you
so
know,
good.
They don't have to be perfect people, but he does it through who's available to say, okay, Jasmine, I believe in you.
Yeah.
I mean, you said it multiple times about different people. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here. And over again, we see that, you know, scripture's true, that God works all things
together for
the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. And I love your story of redemption. And then your name, the name for your company.
Yeah. Mars Management. So I named my company after my mother. My mother's name is Marzetta. And it was something about, I found her journal years ago, and it was in like deep down in this box. And I remember finding a piece of paper in there. And that paper was a sheet that said, it had butterflies on it, and it's one reason why I love butterflies. But on that sheet, she actually gave it to me for my last birthday that she was alive. And I found that sheet, and on it, she said, it takes a lifetime to love someone like you. And she said, Jasmine, reach for the stars. And so I remembered that, and I still have it. It's actually hanging up in my bedroom right now.
So good.
And that piece of paper reminded me that the planet Mars, which seems outside of our reach, right? And it's in space, it's so far away, that there is something redeeming about reaching for your dreams, your goals, and whatever it takes, right? And so I linked that and I was like, Mars, the planet, Mars, my mother. And that's what I named the company after.
What a beautiful story. What a beautiful testimony
God
of
is
the
so
goodness of God.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for being vulnerable.
Yeah.
I'm so excited about this next season in your life.
God is good.
You don't know this, but Jasmine, I mean, she leads in every area of her life, and she pastors, and she leads women through freedom groups, and she builds an incredible business, and she speaks life into women in industries where they're used up, and you speak value into women. And I just believe God's going to continue to bless you.
Amen.
He's going to continue to bless your marriage and your business. And I'm excited for all that's ahead. And so let me pray as we close. Is that okay?
Of course.
Lord, thank you for Jasmine's story. Thank you, God, that you've used her life, every little part of it, God, to speak a redemption story. God, that you can take anything, Lord, any place we find ourselves in, any season, in any heartache, God, and you can breathe life back into us and you can redeem us from the inside out. We ask, God, that you would bless Jasmine, that you would bless her business and everything, God, that you have before her, Lord, that she would continue to speak the good news of who you are and how you redeem all things, God. We thank you for it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. PK, thank you so much.
Thanks for joining. I appreciate you. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today to this conversation, this story. We're so grateful for you. Go ahead and take a moment to share it, subscribe, whatever you got to do.
It. Yeah. Follow PK on social media.
Follow. We can do that too. But we love you. We'll see you next time.
Bye.